I grew up in a family where maternal love was selective. My mother never hid who was the main child for her. My sister/brother got everything. The best clothes from expensive boutiques, vacations abroad that I could only dream of, enthusiasm and support that I had never felt on myself. And what did I get? Ignoring, depreciation, the feeling that I was never good enough. When I came home with excellent grades, my mother would just shrug. You always studied well. What's so wrong with that? And if my sister/brother brought at least one good result, it was a celebration. You are our pride. You are so smart. I was not jealous. I simply did not understand. Why were my efforts never appreciated? Why was I ignored? I hoped that when I grew up, everything would change. I thought that when I became independent, when I could prove that I was worth something, my mother would finally appreciate me. I believed that sooner or later she would realize that she had 2 children, not 1. But this was the biggest illusion of my life. I could not even imagine what awaited me ahead. My father was the only person who brought some balance to our family. He didn't always talk about his feelings, but I knew he wasn't like my mother. He supported me when I wanted to do what I liked. He didn't differentiate between me and my sister/brother. He would notice me where my mother would just walk by, and then he was gone. How everything changed after his death. I remember that day in every detail. The phone call in the middle of the night. My mother's tears, which I saw for the first time. The hospital ward, cold and silent. My father would never come home again. I was broken. But at that time I didn't know that my world was about to collapse completely. My mother became indifferent to everything, except money. As soon as the funeral arrangements were finalized, my mother changed. She no longer looked sad. She no longer mentioned her father. She was too busy with other things. One evening, she gathered the whole family around the table and said something that I couldn't believe. The entire inheritance, the house, the money, the business, will belong to your sister/brother. They need it more. I froze. That was the moment I realized I was never here. The house I grew up in? It now belonged to my sister/brother. The money my father left me? She decided I didn't deserve even a part of it. Everything he had created his whole life, his younger pride, would get it without any effort. I looked at my mother and didn't recognize her. Why? My voice trembled. She just shrugged. You're strong. You can handle it. You can always start over. Those words tore me apart. She didn't even explain why. She didn't even say she was sorry. She just crossed me out, just as easily as she had once ignored my achievements. I couldn't accept what had happened. Everything I knew, everything I considered home, suddenly became alien. I looked at my mother, at my sister/brother, and couldn't believe that they had crossed me out so easily. How can you do this to me? My words came out almost in a whisper. My mother didn't even look up. She just continued drinking her tea, as if nothing had happened. My sister/brother only smiled smugly. I tried to reach her heart. I explained that I had been a part of this family all my life. I reminded her that my father loved us equally and would never have supported such an act. I begged her to at least talk to me, to explain her logic. She was silent, and then, finally, coldly replied, I've already decided everything. Don't make a drama out of it. These words hit me harder than a slap. Drama? I was trying to save my future, and she called it drama. I didn't want money. I didn't want to take anything from my sister/brother. I only wanted justice. But there was no justice here. Her coldness was killing me. I didn't understand why she was doing this. I'm your daughter, I exclaimed, no longer holding back my tears. So what? She replied, her expression unchanged. I looked at her and understood. She never loved me as much as she loved my sister/brother. She never considered me important. She didn't even regret her decision. At that moment, I understood something important. She doesn't need me anymore. This was not a random act. It was a clear choice. She never planned to leave me anything. She had decided in advance that she didn't need me. It destroyed me. But at the same time, another feeling began to arise in me. I would no longer ask her for love. I would no longer try to earn her attention. I would no longer live with the feeling that I owed her something. She rejected me, and I will remember that. I couldn't just leave in silence. I had to at least try to make her understand what she was doing. One last time, I went into her room. She was sitting in front of the mirror, slowly combing her hair. She looked calm, as if nothing had happened. "Why are you being so mean to me? I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for your house or your business. I'm asking for one thing, to explain to me why you made this choice." She put down the comb, turned to me and smiled. "Why do you need to know? It won't change anything." I clenched my hands into fists. "I want to know the truth." She sighed and said calmly, "Because you don't owe me anything. And I don't owe you anything." These words changed me forever. I felt my legs give out. She said it so easily, coldly, without any regret. "You don't owe me anything. And I don't owe you either." These words cut me off from her once and for all. "So I'm a stranger to you?" I could barely speak. She just shrugged her shoulders. "You're strong, you'll cope." I stood there, silently looking at her. I understood everything. She never wanted me in her life. She raised me because she had to. She never considered me equal to her favorite child. I wanted to say something. But what? She had already decided everything. I left this house, and I never looked back. I didn't take anything. Not a single thing. Not a single gift. No memory. This house was no longer my home. This family was no longer my family. I closed the door behind me, knowing that I would never return. Or so I thought. I didn't know then that life would show me the other side of the story. That after a while they would beg me to come back. That I would become the one they couldn't survive without. But that was ahead. Now I was just a girl with no home, no money and no family. But I already knew that this was just the beginning. The door closed behind me forever. I stood in front of this house that was no longer my home, and I didn't know where to go. I had nothing. No savings. No plan. No place to sleep. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. There was only a cold, crushing pain inside. I had been left with nothing. I had been thrown out, as if I had never been part of this family. I had been betrayed by those I trusted the most. But with that pain, something else was being born inside. Something new. Something strong. I will never be a victim again. I walked down the street, not knowing what to do next. Friends. I had no close people who could accept me. A job. I worked part-time, but that salary wasn't even enough to rent a room. Relatives. They always considered me superfluous and were in no hurry to help. I was alone, but I wasn't going to give up. I realized that I had only two options. Either I would remain a victim who would complain about injustice, or I would turn this moment into the beginning of a new story. I chose the second. I'm starting all over again. The following days were brutal. I slept in cheap hotels and on friends' couches. I ate the cheapest food, saving every penny. I took on any job just to earn a little money. But I didn't give up. I knew that it was temporary, that this was just a small step back before a big leap forward. I changed my approach to life. I stopped being afraid of difficulties. I stopped waiting for help. I stopped hoping for justice. I realized, if I want to succeed, I have to do it myself. I'm no longer a girl who can be thrown away. That night was the last time I cried. I swore to myself, I will never depend on others again. I will never let someone control my life again. I will never ask anyone for alms again. I didn't know how, but I knew for sure. I will become successful. I will become the one they can't do without. I will make them regret it. I started building my life from scratch. Without help. Without support. Without a plan. With only rage in my heart and unwavering determination. I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to win. I would never let myself be put down again. I would never let anyone think I was weak again. I would never ask anyone for anything again. I took any job. I worked as a waitress in a cafe with horrible shifts, exhausting work, and a constant yelling from the manager. I worked part-time as a courier, lugging heavy delivery bags until my arms were numb with fatigue. I even took night shifts to make more money, even though I barely slept. I didn't complain. I knew it was temporary. I knew that this money was my ticket to a new life. Every day, when I came home, I told myself, this is not forever. I will use this time to become stronger. One day, I will look back on my past and laugh. I stopped wasting time feeling sorry for myself. I decided I would no longer allow myself to cry. I would no longer think about my family. I would no longer look for love where there was none. Instead, I focused on my work and my studies. I started taking online courses. I studied while riding in public transport, while waiting for a delivery order, while drinking coffee during a short break. I invested every free minute in my future. I got a chance and I didn't waste it. Once, a customer in a cafe overheard me speaking English to tourists. He asked, "Do you always work here?" I said it was temporary, because I was saving money to grow. He smiled and said, "I have a company. We need people who want to learn. If you are ready to work, I will give you a chance." This was my first big test. Can I step out of my comfort zone? Can I handle it? Can I take advantage of this opportunity? I answered without hesitation. I am ready. My first step to success. I was hired as a probationary employee in the office. I worked 12 hours a day, trying to prove that I was better than everyone else. I took on extra tasks. I stayed longer than everyone else. I studied even when others gave up. When my boss said, "We are hiring you," for the first time in a long time, I felt pride in my heart. This is just the beginning. I was no longer a girl who could be kicked out of the house. I was no longer dependent on someone else's will. I was no longer a victim. I was building my new life, and this was just the beginning. I knew there was still a lot of struggle ahead, but now I was ready. Now I was in control of my destiny, and very soon they would hear about me again. I knew that getting my first serious job was just a small step. The real struggle was just beginning. I could no longer afford to be weak. I could no longer depend on anyone. I could no longer wait for a miracle. I had to build my future myself. The job that changed everything. I worked until I was exhausted at my new company. Colleagues came in the morning. I was already there. They left in the evening. I stayed to work. They had lunch. I used this time to study. I knew that I had no right to make mistakes. I had to prove that I was not just another employee, but someone without whom the company could not exist. I was hungry for success. I was noticed. A few months later, management began to pay attention to me. My name was mentioned at weekly meetings. I was invited to meetings where only managers had been before. I began to be entrusted with important projects. And then one day my boss called me into his office. He looked at me for a long time and said, "You are one of the most promising employees. I want to promote you." A promotion. A big salary. A new level. I could hardly believe my ears. I didn't just survive after being kicked out of my home. I won. I became someone they didn't believe I could become. I was no longer a girl looking for help. I was no longer a victim of injustice. I was no longer a shadow in someone's life. I was self-sufficient, strong and independent. I wasn't just standing on my feet, I was flying high. And now they find out. Fate has a sense of humor. Once I was scrolling through social media and came across a photo of my mother. Her eyes no longer shone with confidence. Her perfect life fell apart. My sister/brother had lost all their money. Their business had failed. They had lost their home. They had become the ones who had been kicked out of their own world. I looked at these photos and knew they would still remember me. But I was ready. Now I am not the kind of girl who can be simply thrown away. I stared at the photo for a long time. My mother's face was worn. The eyes that had once looked at me with indifference now radiated fear and fatigue. She was no longer the strong, commanding woman who had thrown me out of the house without hesitation. Her life was falling apart. Everything she had built had turned to rubble. There was no more money. All her savings had disappeared along with her failed investments. The business she had passed on to my sibling had gone bankrupt. The house where I had once been humiliated was up for sale. The bank was taking everything they had left. I didn't know all the details yet, but I didn't need to dig into the truth. I could already see that they had gotten what they deserved. The irony of fate. She considered me weak, but she is now in a hopeless situation. Sister/brother is not as perfect a child as she thought. She gave all her love, resources, and support to one child all her life, because she believed that this child was her only hope, that she would bring success, preserve the family business, increase wealth. But when it came to responsibility, her beloved child turned out to be irresponsible, spent all the money on expensive things, entertainment, vacations, could not cope with the business she had entrusted to her, was not ready to take on the burden of responsibility. When the money ran out, this child simply turned around and ran away. The mother was left alone. I have been waiting for this moment all my life. When they kicked me out of the house, she did not even look back. She didn't worry about how I would live, what I would eat, where I would sleep. But now, she is facing poverty. She feels the same fear that I once felt. She understands that there is no one else to rely on. And I knew that soon I would receive a call from her. She would crawl to me with pleas. And then, one day the phone rang. I was sitting in my luxurious office. There were expensive documents on the table. My morning cappuccino was steaming next to it. The phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. I looked at the screen, and my heart sank. It was her. I knew what she wanted. She wasn't calling to see how I was doing. She wasn't calling to say, "I'm proud of you." She was calling because for the first time in her life she needed me. I answered, "Hi, Mom." I picked up the phone and heard a voice I hadn't heard in over a year. It no longer sounded confident. There was none of the cold indifference I remembered from our last conversation. It was trembling. "Daughter." I remained silent. I wanted to give her a chance to experience what it meant to ask me for help. She swallowed nervously and continued, I know you're probably mad at me. Oh, she has no idea how much. But I made a mistake. I was cruel. I was unfair. Mom never admitted her mistakes. If she's saying this now, she's desperate. She's out of options. She's standing on the edge of an abyss. The truth she didn't want to tell. I decided to give her a chance to explain. "What happened, Mom?" A hoarse tirade escaped her lips, which she must have rehearsed in her head 1,000 times. "Your brother/sister spent all the money. They sold part of the family business for next to nothing. We're in debt now. The bank is threatening to take the house." I listened without interrupting. Because I knew the most important thing was yet to come. And here it was. "Daughter, please help us." Here it was. The moment I had been waiting for. The moment when she humbled herself before me. The moment when she asked for salvation. But I was in no hurry to answer. "Why are you coming to me, Mom?" Her humiliation. She tried to speak in a gentle voice. "You've always been strong. You've always managed. You've never needed help. That's how it was." She tried to pretend that she'd always believed in me. That she hadn't kicked me out penniless, homeless. That she hadn't said, "You're strong. You'll make it." And now, when she needed help, she remembered me. "Mom, when I stood before you empty-handed, did you help me?" Silence. I imagined her sitting somewhere in a dark apartment, clutching her phone, trying to find an answer that didn't exist. She had cruelly abandoned me, and now she wants me to save her? I gave her the same words she said to me a year ago. I took a breath. She smiled, and answered in the same tone she had spoken to me a year ago. "You're strong, Mom. You'll make it." The silence on her part was deafening. "But daughter, we're family." Family? Did she finally talk about family when it was convenient for her? A wave of emotions flooded me. But it wasn't an insult anymore. It was a victory. I realized that I no longer felt pain. Only peace. Her last attempt. She tried her last blow. "You're not like me. You're good. I know you won't abandon us." But she was wrong. I'm no longer someone who can be betrayed and returned when it's convenient. I am no longer the one who will run to help those who do not deserve it. I am no longer the one who will let someone else control her life. I sighed and said one last sentence. "Goodbye, Mom." And pressed end call. She got her answer. And now she is left where she sent me a year ago. With nothing. I hung up, but I kept staring at the phone for a long time. Was that all? Part of me was waiting for her to call again. That she would start begging, crying, blaming me. But there was no call. She understood. I was no longer the girl you could just throw out of your life and then bring back when it was convenient. I was no longer the one who would save those who left me to die. I had made my choice, and it was final. Her last trap. The next day my brother/sister wrote to me. "Mom is feeling really bad. If you could come." I almost laughed. Another trick. Another attempt to make me feel guilty. She won't eat. She cries all the time. She's so ashamed. But I remember them standing together when they threw me out of the house. They didn't even blink when they told me I wasn't their family anymore. They decided they didn't need me. And now I decided the same about them. I replied with just one sentence. If she's ashamed, it means she did the right thing. I was finally free. I hung up the phone, leaned back on the couch and felt ease, peace, victory. I'd lived with this pain for a whole year. All those sleepless nights when I cried into my pillow. All those moments when I remembered how they just took everything and didn't even look back. All those doubts. What if I'm still important to them? But now everything was clear. They made their own choice. And now they live with the consequences. I was no longer their victim. I was no longer the girl who begged for love. I was the woman who survived and won. I never looked back. A few months later, I got a few more texts. First from my brother/sister. Then from my mother. But I didn't respond anymore. Because that chapter of my life was closed. Forever. Mom didn't call anymore. No one in the family tried to persuade me to help anymore. I thought they understood my final choice. But the truth was different. They were busy with their own survival. I didn't need to take revenge. They destroyed themselves. A few months later, I accidentally found out the truth. The bank took the house. The business was sold for a pittance. My golden sister/brother didn't have enough money, and they ran away, leaving my mother alone. I wasn't surprised by this. I always knew that those whom my mother loved more than me would betray her at the first opportunity. But she didn't expect this. She was sure that the children she protected so much would stay with her until the end. But they just turned around and left, leaving her alone, homeless, penniless, and without any support. Just like she had left me once. Life gave her everything back. She tried to live with friends, but all those she had once flattered now closed their doors to her. No one needed her. She had no one to turn to. She finally understood what it was like to be abandoned. And when she was alone for the first time in her life, she must have remembered me. The one who was always there when she needed it. The one who always helped, even when she was humiliated. The one who was ready to forgive. But this time I was not going back. This time I was not someone who could be used and thrown away. She had to deal with the consequences of her decisions herself. I didn't feel sorry for her anymore. Did I regret my decision? Did I feel bad about the thought of her being left alone? No. I remembered the day she kicked me out. I remembered how I begged her to change her mind. How I stood before her empty-handed, and she just turned her back on me. She got what she deserved. And this time I just turned my back on her. Just like she had done to me once. I was walking down the street, breathing in the fresh air. It was an ordinary day, but for me it meant much more. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. The pain of the past no longer dragged me down. I no longer carried this burden inside me. I was free. Free from pain. Free from past grievances. Free from those who did not appreciate me. I no longer looked back. I used to be afraid of loneliness. I believed that family was the most important thing, that my mother would always love me. But life taught me the most important thing. Family is not just blood ties. Family is those who support you, even when you can't give them anything in return. Family is those who do not betray. My real family is myself. I was no longer a child who craved my mother's love. I was a woman who had learned to love herself. My new reality. I had my own apartment. I had a successful career. I had a life that I had built on my own, without their help. I no longer depended on anyone. I no longer waited for anyone's approval. I no longer felt the pain of their betrayal. My mother no longer had a place in my life. She had made her own choice. And I had made mine. I had won. I had triumphed. I had survived. And now I was happy.